The Hazard Communication Standard requires employers to disclose toxic and hazardous substances in the workplace. This presentation reinforces the importance of recognizing and identifying chemicals and their hazards through labeling, markings, pictograms, and safety data sheets. The Hazard Communication Standard gives employees the right to know what chemical hazards they may be exposed to in the workplace. The standard was developed to ensure everyone who works with hazardous chemicals is aware of the risks and necessary precautions. OSHA has adapted the Hazard Communication Standard to align with GHS, the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. The purpose of GHS is to standardize how we communicate about chemical hazards in the workplace and improve the understanding of risks associated with chemical use. The Hazard Communication Standard requires employers to have an effective hazard communication program that describes the requirements for safe use of hazardous materials. This includes chemical inventory, which is a list of hazardous chemicals known to be present in the workplace. Communication of hazards, how hazards of chemicals are communicated to affected employees, such as safety data sheets and labeling of containers. And training requirements, as employees must be trained on the hazards of chemicals and protective measures. Labels are one of the main methods for communicating information about chemicals. All labels must include the same 6 elements. The product identifier is the name of the chemical and should match the safety data sheet. The signal word indicates the level of severity. Use warning for a less severe hazard or danger for more severe. A hazard statement is a phrase assigned to a hazard class that describes the nature of the product's hazard. For example, flammable liquid and vapor may cause eye damage and may cause drowsiness and dizziness. A precautionary statement describes the recommended measures to minimize or prevent exposure. For example, keep away from heat, sparks, open flames, hot surfaces, or no smoking. The supplier identification must have the name, address, and phone number of the manufacturer or supplier of the chemical. Pictograms are symbols intended to visually convey specific hazard information. Portable secondary containers of working solutions must be labeled properly unless they are intended to be used during the work shift. In this case, only the identity of the chemical must be on the label. Pictograms are visual markings that convey the chemical's hazards with a black symbol inside of a red diamond. There are 9 pictograms total. The star on the torso represents a health hazard, including carcinogen, mutagen, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer, target organ toxicity, and aspiration toxicity. The flame is for flammable substances, pyrophorics, self-heating, emits flammable gas, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. The exclamation mark represents an irritant, skin and eye irritant, skin sensitizer, acute toxicity, narcotic effects, and a respiratory tract irritant. The cylinder is for gases under pressure. The 2 test tubes are for corrosives that cause burns to the skin and eye damage, as well as corrosive to metals. The bomb is for explosives, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. The flame over circle is for oxidizers. The fish and tree are chemicals hazardous to the environment. The skull and crossbones are for toxic and potentially fatal chemicals. Safety data sheets are documents that contain more detailed information about a chemical than can be found on just the label. The same information is required on all SDSs in a standard 16-section format. Identification has the product identifier used on the label, manufacturer or distributor name, address, phone number, and emergency phone number, recommended use, and restrictions on use. Hazard identification contains the hazard and precautionary statements, pictograms, signal word, and any other information related to known hazards of the product. Composition and information on ingredients provides a list of all hazardous ingredients, their CAS number, and their concentrations or concentration ranges in the product. First aid measures describes potential symptoms and acute or delayed effects, necessary first aid instructions, and recommendations for immediate medical treatment. Firefighting measures list suitable extinguishing techniques and equipment. Accidental release measures lists emergency procedures for responding to a spill, required PPE, and basic methods of containment and cleanup. Handling and storage lists brief precautions for safe handling and storage, such as incompatibilities with other chemicals. Exposure controls and personal protection lists exposure limits for each ingredient and required PPE. Physical and chemical properties lists the characteristics of the product, such as color, boiling point, pH, and density. Stability and reactivity lists chemical stability, possibility of hazardous reactions, conditions to avoid, incompatible materials, and hazardous decomposition products. Toxicological information describes possible routes of exposure, symptoms, acute and chronic effects, and numerical measures of toxicity. Sections 12 through 16 are not regulated by OSHA because they are handled by other agencies. These include ecological information, disposal considerations, transport information, regulatory information, and other information. PPE is your final defense against exposure to hazardous materials. PPE does not reduce or eliminate the hazard, it only protects the wearer. Wear gloves when handling hazardous materials, chemicals of unknown toxicity, corrosive materials, rough or sharp-edged objects, and very hot or very cold materials. Be sure to select the correct glove for the material being handled. Inspect gloves before and during use to ensure that they are not damaged. Wash your hands with soap and water after removing gloves. Wear long sleeves, pants, and closed-toed shoes to protect the skin from splashes or spills. Plastic or rubber aprons are best for protection from corrosive or irritating liquids. All skin should be covered, especially at the wrists. Closed-toed shoes are also required. Always wear eye protection, such as safety glasses. Goggles or a face shield may be required for procedures with a higher probability of creating splashes or aerosols.